Chapter 20. Old Enemies. Afternoon Tea. The Princess's Gift. The change was almost imperceptible, but it was there nonetheless. As Ganondorf sat in quiet meditation before the embers of the dying fire, he felt the enchantment that enveloped the mountain's peak quietly dissolve. Looking about him, the snow no longer seemed to be falling quite so blindingly, and the cold mountain air seemed to have less of a bite to it. He rose, and waited. He did not have to wait long. It was mere minutes before Link emerged from the foggy whiteness, his face dark with anger. Ganondorf made no move to defend himself when he slid the hunting knife from its sheath and pressed it against his throat. Link had to reach up above his head to do it. "You lied to me," he said. "Link!" Navi shouted. "What are you doing?" Out of necessity, Ganondorf could feel the cold steel biting into his neck. "I only meant necessity." Link was the calmest of them. To see him so disturbed was unsettling, even to Ganondorf. "Are people just tools to you, Ganondorf? Am I? You cannot look me in the eye and tell me that, the very first day you arrived in Hyrule, telling you everything you know now would not have been a bad idea. You were looking out for my best interests, weren't you?" Link laughed hollowly. "Were you looking out for my best interests when you had that bird throw me into the sea? When you possessed Zelda and forced me to fight her? What about then?" Ganondorf remembered the evils of his past life, but to hear Link name them was still an unpleasant shock. "I have done terrible things. That I cannot deny. But Link, you must believe me, I swear." "What good is your word?" Link hissed. "What good, when I've watched you swear hundreds of oaths and toss them aside? If you think I'm going to trust you, after keeping this hidden from me, then would you two shut up?" They turned to see Midna watching them sullenly. "I'm cold. I'm leaving." Link removed the dagger from Ganondorf's throat. "It would be best to be as far down the mountain as possible before nightfall. We can discuss things once we are back in Kashuto." Ganondorf rubbed the spot on his neck where the blade had sliced a shallow cut. Although he reluctantly agreed, Link still made certain that Ganondorf was walking in front of him as they started down towards the caves, and kept his bow strung and in hand. They plodded down the narrow path in the side of the mountain in silence, save for Navi's unanswered questions. "What were you guys fighting about?" she asked, riding on Link's shoulder. "Are you mad at Ganondorf for some reason? Are you not going to be friends anymore?" He ignored her. As the enchanted storm continued to dissipate, the impenetrable whiteness surrounding Snow Peak Mountain was giving way to clear mountain air and a bright blue sky. Ahead of him, Ganondorf stopped suddenly. Link drew an arrow from his quiver. Midna turned to look back and forth between them. "What is it now?" "Down!" Ganondorf roared, but Link was already face down in the snow. The arrow sizzled overhead, swathed in flames. They snuffed out briefly as they sank into the thick deposits of ice that hung over the ridge, but then exploded in a blossom of fire and magic. "Fire arrows!" Ganondorf signaled up. "They're trying to trigger an avalanche." For a moment Link could not see the archers against the glare of the snow and ice, but then Russell moved as he knocked another arrow and the sun lit up his gilded armor. The commandant and his team of archers had scaled their way up to a desolate ledge of rock, one that overlooked the path to the summit. A deep, dark crevasse lay between them. Link estimated about 20 bows, but as for how many of them were firing enchanted arrows, he could not say. As quickly as he could, he stood and fired back. The distance between the two outcrops was great, and Link was stronger and more skilled than the soldiers. His arrow pierced the breastplate of a man who promptly toppled forward into the cold abyss while their shots sailed above his head. "Don't let them bury us!" Ganondorf lobbed balls of energy at Russell, who barely deflected them with his sword. Link grabbed Midna's shoulder. "Midna! Can you refreeze the ice they're melting?" "I got fire," she said. "I don't got ice." Russell took aim with another of his fire arrows. Ganondorf stood, magic crackling in his hands. An arrow, either well-aimed or lucky, buried itself in his neck. Hic! A wet spluttering noise came out of his throat as his hand leapt up to clutch at the wound. Another shot thumped into his chest, and another embedded itself in his arm. "Boss!" Navi yelled as Ganondorf collapsed. "Damn it!" Link and Midna were pinned down. "Any ideas?" She lobbed a fireball back at the soldiers. "We're in trouble here." Ganondorf, it seemed, was not about to be felled by a stray arrow. He tore the shaft out of his throat, leaving his neck a bloody ruin. "Good goddesses," Midna whispered. He was panting heavily, blood pooling in the snow beneath him. The Triforce on his hand shone. Slowly, agonizingly, Ganondorf hauled himself to his feet. More arrows pierced his chest, but he ignored them. His olive skin was literally glowing now, sparking and hissing with barely suppressed energy. "Run!" Link yelled, certain that, regardless of what was about to happen, it wouldn't be good. Ganondorf screamed, a drawn-out cry of agony and rage as he channeled impossible amounts of magic through his body. Link could feel the power vibrating the foundations of the very mountain itself. Searing light poured from Ganondorf's hands as he obliterated the shelf of rock that harbored Russell and his men, sending soldiers tumbling into the abyss below. "He's bringing down the whole damn mountain!" Midna cried, clutching onto Link. Chunks of stone and ice were breaking off from the ridge above them, and the rock beneath their feet was becoming increasingly unstable. "Get into the caves," Link pulled Midna to her feet. "What about Ganondorf?" "Leave him, let's go." She wrenched herself free of his grasp and ran to Ganondorf, who was still enveloped in a maelstrom of light. "Boss, we have to go." A piece of ice the size of a small building broke off from the shelf upon which they were standing, with a crack like a whip. Shards of ice and stone sprayed out from the ground below his feet. Across the gap, the few men opposite had survived Ganondorf's assault were fumbling for arrows and stringing their bows. One more arrow pierced Ganondorf, and the outpouring of magic ceased as he collapsed in a heap. Commandant Russell reached for another, but it was too late. The very mountainside was collapsing. Link turned to flee. "Link!" Midna was trying desperately to lift Ganondorf to his feet, but he was far too heavy for her. "You have to leave him." "No, I..." The path between them shattered as a torrent of debris cascaded down the mountainside. The rock where Link had been standing moments ago broke into nothingness and vanished below. The last thing he saw was Midna's face as she watched him run for the caves. She didn't look angry, or sad, or even resolute. Only confused. "Sit down, you're far too uptight. Come on. Have a biscuit." Vadi waved the cookie at Zant, and then tossed it in his face. It was burned to a cinder before it could hit him. "You're not fun. Would it kill you to relax once in a while?" "I must never rest," the Twilight breathed. "I must remain vigilant, unceasing, until I have had my vengeance." "Vengeance? First time I've heard of anything of the sort. Have you ever mentioned this before?" Vadi rolled his eyes and plucked an olive from the spread in front of him. "Princess, have you tried this cheese? A work of art." Zelda sipped delicately at her tea. A stray snowflake settled in the teacup when she set it down, floating briefly on the surface of the steaming drink before melting into nothingness. "I shall instruct the kitchens to send a wheel of it up to your quarters. You do so love to indulge, Vadi." The diminutive mage, never one for manners, spit the stone of the olive over the edge of the balcony, where it plummeted untold stories to the rooftops below. "And why not? Such an endless icy existence as yours would never suit me, princess. No, I'll enjoy my food, wine, and women, and rest comfortably in a hole in the ground when it's all said and done." They supped at the top of the highest tower in Hyrule, a great spire that climbed above the very clouds themselves, although on a clear day such as this one could see the entirety of the known world from their lofty perch. Vadi's breath swirled into mist in the thin air, and a sparse few flakes of snow eddied and whirled about their heads, despite the cloudless weather. "I must say, don't you find it rather cold up here?" Chancellor Cole asked plaintively. His own tea had gone ice cold. Freezing, Vadi said, cutting himself a piece of some rare animal or other. Oh. Cole looked into his drink, which had begun to ice over. Zant was staring into the north. Do you hear it? He asked. Hear what? Cole cupped a hand to his ear, unsure what he was listening for. You look a fool, Cole, said Zelda's fourth guest. It's magic that's on the wind. Varen. Vadi couldn't help but feel uneasy around her, despite himself. He often wondered whether she was magically inclined or just very clever. Varen was the leader of Hyrule's second most notorious criminal outfit, and they were renowned for having none of the scruples of their Gerudo counterparts. Few people knew that Varen was also in the employ of Princess Zelda. Fewer still were aware of the extent to which the princess's control over her city and her subjects extended. Now that Varen mentioned it, Vadi could feel something. A distant swell of magic, horribly powerful. And, carried on the wind, blood, and steel and stone. Zelda breathed deeply of the northern wind. Chancellor Cole mentioned something to me not long ago. I did. Cole stammered. Yes. A pressing concern for the safety of our citizens, and an intolerance of some less savory elements of our fair city. Oh, Cole bobbed his head up and down so rapidly Vadi feared it would topple off his shoulders. Yes, that's right. I did. She peered to the north, listening to the swirling of that wind. And, perhaps, even something Vadi could not hear. He saw the princess's hand clench reflexively. I want the Gerudo destroyed. Completely. Hunt them down, every last member. Cut their throats, throw them in the river, I care not. Varen bowed. It will be done, your highness. Vadi. Zant. The Twilight Mage snapped out of his vengeful reverie. The only person who could command his attention of late was Zelda. Link will return to Hyrule soon. I will need to know when. It shall be so. Zelda delicately shaved off a slice of the cheese that Vadi had recommended, to go with her tea. She turned her attention back to the northern horizon, where the lofty mountain peaks rose into the sky, as high as the tower where they now sat. Princess, Vadi said, when it became apparent that Zelda was going to say nothing more. What is it, Vadi? What of Link's traveling companions? A pair of vagabonds, I believe. What were their names? Ah, yes. Ganondorf and Midna? I certainly hope you hadn't forgotten. Zelda, ignoring his antagonism, did not avert her gaze from the distant mountain range. Did you not feel it on the wind? How this constituted an explanation escaped him. A breeze often means nothing, your highness. Should I choose to summon a gale and sweep Chancellor Cole over the edge of this lovely balcony, would you take that for a portent as well? Chancellor Cole hung onto the table very tightly. Zelda's cold lips smiled a smile that would have been charming on another woman. The Gerudo King and the Twilight Princess will be of no concern. Destiny is on the wind, Vadi. Destiny, and the will of the gods. It was a beautiful day in Kajuto. The lazy calm of the town was a welcome relief after his breakneck flight down Snowpeak as chunks of the mountain continued to give way, wiping away the path to the summit for good. Link found his way to the inn and slumped into a chair, tearing into a haunch of mutton and trying to forget the expression that was on Midna's face as he had abandoned her and Ganondorf. You didn't abandon her. There was nothing you could do. He felt bad about Midna, but could summon no remorse for leaving Ganondorf to the chaos he had created. He had believed the Gerudo to be one of his few friends in this strange version of Hyrule, but Ganondorf had done nothing but mislead and manipulate him. Every time he began to feel bad, he would relieve the pain of the great tines of the trident piercing his side again, or recall how it had felt to be on the receiving end of one of those magical bolts. No, he decided, Ganondorf had not redeemed himself in Link's eyes. An eternity of atrocities must be answered for. Are you going to leave me behind, too? The voice startled Link right out of his chair, drawing curious stares from the other patrons. Navi! You followed me. You said that we had to go. The little fairy was huddled in one of his pockets, where she had hidden during his mad journey down the mountainside. She fluttered out onto the table now. What are we going to do about Ganondorf and Midna? We have to go rescue them. I'm not going back up there. She looked confused. Well, what are you going to do? He realized how aimless he was without Ganondorf to make decisions. Another manipulation he hadn't noticed. I don't know. Well, we have to do something. Do I? Right now Link just felt tired. He had relived this same story 1,000 times on the mountain summit, and right now he felt as if the gods could just go on and figure things out without him. He suddenly wanted no part of Hyrule, of the Nameless, of the Triforce, and least of all of Zelda or Ganondorf. He polished off the last of his meal, paid the innkeeper, and then wandered over to the stables, with Navi bobbing alongside him the whole way. Their horses were still inside, right where they had left them after their arrival in Kashuto only 2 nights ago. Epona waited in the stall between Ganondorf's massive black destrier and Midna's sickly-looking mount. He stroked his old friend's mane, whispering comforting words to Epona as he fed her a carrot. Then he saddled her up and rode out of Kashuto, leaving the northern mountains behind him for good. Because they had destroyed the southern pass to the plains, Link was forced to use the only other road out of town, which headed westwards before bending southeast around the foothills of Snow Peak. The road was oft-traveled and beaten into mud, and curved its way alongside a mountain stream and through thick pine forests. As he rode, Link tried to decide what direction of the compass he ought to try. He had a mind to strike east as soon as he was south of the mountain range, keeping away from both the Great Forest and the city of Hyrule. What he would find, he did not know. It would be an adventure, like the time one version of him had ridden out of Hyrule and stumbled into the alternate dimension of Termina. Chasing Navi the fairy, he recalled with no small amount of amusement. Well, he had her with him now. The tiny ball of light had followed him in his flight down the mountain, in his ride out of Kashuto, and now seemed to be with him for good. Watch out! She chimed suddenly, interrupting his musings. Where the road opened up onto the Great Plains, it passed through another narrow pass where Snow Peak's western side met up against one of the lesser mountains beside it. Here the thoroughfare narrowed to perhaps 10 or 12 meters wide at the narrowest point, between a wall of stone and the mountain stream, widening now into one of the tributaries that fed the river Hylia. There was a rider waiting at the pass. Link narrowed his eyes. Yes, the rider was waiting. There was no other word for it. He sat atop his horse keeping vigil at the narrowest part of the bottleneck, where no sentry could possibly miss any riders out of the mountains. He had surely spotted Link by now, so there was nothing for it. He urged Epona into a canter, riding forward to meet the man guarding the pass. I never would have guessed, when I first met you that rainy night, that we would cross paths again in this faraway place. The rider urged his mount forward as well, revealing the lined face, worn armor, and silvery hair of Vissen. That the gods should see fit to take this humble old soldier and move him together with such a prominent piece in their game is baffling, isn't it? I suppose we must be so funny to them in our struggles. He smiled. Link strung an arrow and took aim. His fingers itched to loose the shaft, to bury it deep in the traitor's heart. Going to kill me, Link? Vissen did him the favor of unbuckling his rusted cuirass, baring his chest, covered only by a thin linen undershirt. I suppose I should be glad. I've lived a long life, and such a skilled marksman as yourself cannot fail to provide me with the mercy of a quick death. What are you doing here? Link asked him. They were far enough away that he had to raise his voice, but not far enough to shout. Link would be able to shoot him 3, maybe 4 times should he try to flee. Or charge. Navi fluttered overhead. Why'd you do it, Vissen? She pleaded, why'd you have to betray us? I thought you were our friend. I was, he said. Come on. Cease this farce, Link. Put your bow away. Ride with me. Don't do it, Link, he'll kill you. Vissen rebuckled his armor. And why would I do that? You think I rode all the way out here just to have a go at the bearer of courage, and die with an arrow in my heart? No, I come bearing a message. Link lowered his bow. What's the message? Ride with me, and you'll find out. He turned and galloped into the rocky plains. Link, curious and throwing caution to the winds, followed. Their conversation began strangely. Did you know that I was the commandant once? Vissen said, as they struck south and west, for the great forest. No. How was Link to know? He hadn't known anything of the city of Hyrule until mere months ago. I was. Before Russell. I taught him the ways of the blade, when he was just a young boy. What happened? How did you end up in the Gerudo? Vissen was wearing a sword now, instead of his battered old spear. The student surpassed the master. Zelda had a tradition of keeping the greatest swordsman in the city as her commandant, and when Russell proved better than me, she gave him my old position. That did not sit well with old Vissen, and so I defected to Ganondorf and his band of rebels. But it was a lie, Link said. You were Zelda's man all along, weren't you? The old soldier grimaced. I don't know if I would say that. Say this instead, that I have always remained loyal to the people of Hyrule. Everything I did for the sake of peace. Link laughed. That doesn't change the fact that you betrayed people who trusted you. Oh, Ganondorf knew I was going to betray him, that night you were brought to Hyrule Castle. He told me to do it. More lies from the Gerudo King revealed themselves. Link had been a fool to ever trust him. He did. That's right. He provoked Zelda into capturing him, and you, in order to bring the three bearers of the Triforce together. I think he believed that it would cause the artifact itself to manifest physically, and grant him his heart's desire. Another hazy memory. Ganondorf had done exactly that, in the sunken Hyrule beneath the Great Sea. And his desire then had been Hyrule, Link said. He wants to depose Zelda as the ruler of Hyrule. Do you think so? Vissen smiled. Ganondorf is far from flawless, I know, but I believe that there is more to him than that. You must realize, his lust for power consumed him before. I don't think he wants to be that man again. Link thought about himself, now. Before he had met Vissen, he had intended to ride away from Hyrule, leaving Zelda, Ganondorf, and all their problems behind him. I can understand the desire to be something different than what the gods have made you. To break away from destiny. There's merit in that, true. Vissen pulled his cloak up higher over his shoulders, as a gust of cold wind swept across the empty field. But there is also merit in following the plan that the creators have laid out for each of us. And really, what more could a simple soldier like myself wish for? Link had no response to this. They rode in silence for a bit, before Vissen began to laugh softly. But I'm just an old man. I have no piece of any god inside me. Why are you here, Vissen? Link asked, once more. I told you, a message. And a gift. You never mentioned any gift. The gift is from Zelda. She bid me bring it to you, as a token of friendship and good faith. So the princess had known what he would find on the mountain. And how he would interpret it. The message is from me, as a friend. You look like you could use one of those right about now. Friends tend to be trustworthy. He sighed. Trust me or don't, Link, it's up to you. But my advice to you is the same either way, do what you think is right. Don't let yourself be swayed. You have a good heart. Listen to it. It was late in the afternoon, and it had been a long day. Seeing as there was no way he could make it to the forest before sunset, Link spotted a likely hillock that would provide decent shelter and reined Epona in, intending to make camp for the night. Whose side are you really on, Vissen? He asked as he slid off the horse. Yours. Power and wisdom cloud the judgment of both Zelda and Ganondorf, but you have the blessing of courage, and it keeps you pure. I believe in you, Link. I believe that when the time comes to make the difficult decisions, you will have the strength to do the right thing. He was beginning to feel really guilty about his abandoned Hyrule plan. You knew I was going to ride away from all this, didn't you? You came here to talk me out of it. Zelda knew. And I agreed that you must return to Hyrule, although our line of thought was different in that respect, I should think. And that brings me to Her Highness's gift. Vissen untied a roll of cloth from his saddlebag and handed it to Link. "Here. Nobody but you can touch it, it seems." Link unrolled the cloth, and the greatest sword ever made thumped unceremoniously into the dirt. It was the blade that he had carried with him when he rode into Hyrule City for the first time, a reminder of adventures long past. It was the blade that had been taken from him, that fateful night when he had been captured by Russell and brought to the castle. It was the same blade that had been his most faithful companion, through 1,000 adventures and 1,000 lives. The sound of steel. Vissen drew his own sword, finely honed but well used, the grip stained with blood and sweat. The old guardsman settled into a combat stance. "It would be an honor, Link." Link smiled at the man who had once been his friend, and maybe still was. He bent and picked up the sword that had been made for him. Lifting the master sword towards the sky once more as in the days of old, he leapt forward and met Vissen's steel with his own. Her prison was dark and cold and suffocating. 1,000 tons of earth and rock and snow and ice had parted from the mountainside and cascaded down on top of her, burying Midna in this frigid tomb, where she would die. She was probably dead already. This was probably all in her head. Midna tried to imagine herself in a place that was nice and warm, with lots of cute boys and liquor. It didn't work. She was still buried underneath what felt like half the goddamn mountain. So she was still alive. She wriggled about in the snow. It was loosely packed, and yielded to her touch easily enough that she could soon carve out enough of a space to move her arms about a little bit. Enough air must have been trapped in there with her to keep her alive. Midna tried to use her shadow magic to escape, before she remembered that she hadn't had shadow magic since Zelda had stripped her of it. But she still had fire. Slowly, agonizingly, she began to melt away the ice that held her there, terrified that at any moment she would trigger the collapse that would crush her for good. For a bizarre couple of moments, she realized that she didn't know what way was up and had to make sure she was oriented correctly. Soon enough, she had melted herself a decent little tunnel. Backing up as far as she could, she summoned all the magic left in her tired body and concentrated. The blast launched chunks of ice and rock across the bottom of the pit, punching a hole through to the surface. She crawled out of said hole and took stock of her situation. The avalanche had collapsed the entire mountainside and plunged them all into the crevasse that had been between them and the soldiers who were shooting at them. Judging by the number of swords, pieces of armor, and stray limbs that were poking out of the rubble, a significant number of Russell's men had fallen down here as well. Midna tugged at an arm reaching out of the snow. "Hey, buddy, are you alive?" The entire arm came loose, free of any body that may have been attached to it at any point in time. "Ugh, guess not. Sorry to bother you." She plopped down into the snow and threw the severed arm away. Step 1. Establish if there are any other survivors. "Hello." She stood and yelled, "Is anybody?" Her voice hitched, "Is there anybody?" She sat back down again, swiping at her eyes and reevaluating her priorities. Step 1. Stop crying. Damn it, Link. Once Midna got a handle on step 1 and had stopped crying like some stupid silly prissy princess, which she definitely wasn't, she resumed her search. "Anybody alive down here?" She wandered past more dead soldiers. In places, the snow had been stained red and pink. "Boss? You alive? Ganondorf? Big G? Are you?" She stopped suddenly. Had that been a muffled moan she just heard? "If somebody just made a sound, please make that sound again." She was certain she heard it this time. A groan of pain, like somebody trying to yell but unable to speak. She rushed over to where she thought it had come from. Nah. Her name. She was sure she had heard it. Mid. N.A. She found him face down beneath an enormous slab of ice, a part of the shelf that they had been standing on before the avalanche had destroyed it. Stray sparks of magic trickled about his body, slowly knitting his wounds shut and keeping him alive.
Ganondorf. I knew it. I knew you weren't gonna let a little snow kill you.
The chunk of ice pinning him down was the size of a house. Certainly not a little snow, but she felt that it was important to keep his spirits up. He beckoned her down to him. Barely able to breathe, his neck still mangled and bloody where the arrow had pierced him, Ganondorf's voice was little more than a whisper.
Did you call me Big G? It's your new nickname. I thought we could have nicknames.
She giggled wetly.
Easy, Midna,
she had to remind herself.
Remember step 1.
Ganondorf shot her a confused look.
Nothing. I'm glad you're okay. Let me get to work.
It took the better part of the evening to melt enough of the ice to pull Ganondorf free, and the pit was nearly pitch black by the time she was done. His skin was freezing cold when he did come loose, but when she hugged him she could feel the magic pulsing deep within that great frame, his prodigious strength already returning. Returning slowly, though. She conjured the biggest magical fire she could, and they sat at the edge of the crevasse soaking in its warmth.
That's 2 you owe me,
she said, after a time. Ganondorf was still too weak to stand, or even sit upright, so he was propped up against a boulder.
2. Once for saving your life just now. And again for that time you killed me.
He stared into the fire sullenly.
You saw that? I did. The god showed it to me.
He could still remember the immense power of the fused shadows, and the beast that Midna had become to fight him. The feeling of crushing the energy from her tiny body. Of the helm crumbling to dust between his powerful fingers. He shuddered.
You cold?
She looked at him.
Fine.
He stared into her face. Her fiery red hair, her bright yellow eyes. Ganondorf decided not to let her know that he could tell she had been crying earlier.
I'm sorry,
he said, because he felt it had to be said.
What, for the killing me thing? The gods of the light world brought me back to life, in my real body. No harm done. For not telling you.
She smirked.
If I had murdered you in a past life, there are like 6 different reasons for me to not tell you. That was another you. Another me.
He nodded. He didn't know how it seemed to her, but to him it did not feel like a past life. He could remember it as clearly as his memories from yesterday.
That's why Link ran, wasn't it?
She asked.
I think so. Humph.
She tossed a snowball into the fire, watched it melt.
He should have known better. Help me lie down, closer to the fire. I need to sleep. The magic will make me strong again, but it will be a few days before I can travel.
With some effort, she was able to pull Ganondorf closer to the magical flame. As he closed his eyes, she sat down next to him, wrapping her arms around her legs and clutching them to her chest.
Ganondorf. Yes. I control my own life. Not the gods. That's right. What about you? It used to be that my will was not my own. But no more. Ganondorf.
She said again.
Yes. The goddesses can go to hell. Screw them, and screw their plan.
The Gerudo King laughed, a hoarse wheezing sound.
Now you understand.
Chapter end.